If you'd like, you can do the gallery view, and if you're comfortable turning on your camera, we're gonna all check in with each other for a sec. So I had this whole presentation planned out, and then realized the thing that we really need to process, especially as remediators, is just the current situation of what's going on with coronavirus. And so I've adapted it in a somewhat last minute way. I woke up this morning with a chest cough and got kind of freaked out, and so I had to spend my morning, canceling things and making plans and childcare arrangements and all sorts of things. And so I appreciate your understanding and patience with me as we go through this. This is a topic that I'm really excited about, and I think has a lot of potential to grow and expand. And each one of you, as participants here, can be contributing to this whole new realm that I'm calling mycopsychology. So I'd like to start with a little meditation, just to help us get grounded in the space. So if you'd like, you can close your eyes, and let's just be in our bodies for a second and just notice what's going on. Does your back hurt? The headache? How does it feel to be in your chair or wherever you're sitting? And let's just take a deep breath together. So now picture that you are a spore floating around, and in this great unknown, there are so many possibilities. Who knows where the wind's gonna blow, where you're gonna go, what's gonna happen, and you're just trusting, and you're just going, and you're floating, and finally you land somewhere. And you start growing hyphal branches. You start assessing what this new environment is, this brand new place for you. And let's say it's something that you're maybe not super comfortable with. And there's all these other hyphal branches, and there's all these bugs, and there's all these bacteria and viruses and protists that are all there too, going after the same food source as you. And then how do you want to relate to all of those? How do you want to interact with the other folks in your ecosystem in this new place? And what you do is you're going to dip into your ancestry, your genetic library, and figure out how you can protect yourself and how you can transform this new home where you've landed, this new substrate. How can you turn it into food? And as your human self too, is there anything that you want to be adjusting your relationship towards it, towards others? Are there things that you want to push away or say are an enemy, or there's things that you want to bring in as a collaborator? And how do those affect your inner ecosystem, your inner landscape? And what others out there in your ecosystem, and then here as our hyphal branch, who can we collaborate with? Who can we network with? How can we find our niche in this rotting log? This giant rotting log that we're all a part of. And there, you don't actually have to fix or change or do anything here. My invitation is just to observe and notice what this brings up for you. And as you're exploring this new substrate, if there's anything that you think will feed you and nourish you right now, we can bring that up. And in your own life, what is it that's going to support you and feed you and nourish you and help you stay grounded and protected? And we can come back into our human selves, but still holding on to that. If there's anything that just came up for you right now, I want to invite you to write it down, either in your own notebook or in the chat box. And if you want to share it verbally with this group, I want to invite that if anything just came up for you. Cool. Maybe later. So I'm going to start a short presentation, and then we'll have some discussion. The social mycology piece is a lot about what I wrote in the article that was in the homework. I'm not sure if anybody had a chance to read it. I know it's been a really crazy week for a lot of people. And so that's, basically, so the piece that we may not get to is around starting and maintaining a MycoRenewal organization and getting this work off the ground and collaborating with other people and working with some fun fungal metaphors for that. So I've still got that on the agenda, but if a lot comes up and we want to just have more discussion, I might just get that whole piece and you can just read the article and do it on your own. Cool. So I'm going to share my screen. All right, can y'all see that? Awesome. So does anybody recognize that mushroom?
Is that Schizophyllum communi?
Yeah, oh, I love how everybody pronounces it differently. I say Schizophyllum commune, some people say Schizophyllum, Schizophyllum. Yeah, it's a split-gill fungus. It's a really cool mushroom. It's very special. It's the most widespread mushroom in the world. It's found on every continent except for Antarctica. And part of the reason for that, I would hypothesize, is that it has 28,000 different mating types. So if y'all remember back from Willoughby's lecture on fungal biology, he talked about all of the different spores of possibility that we have with all these different species of mushrooms. So each one of those mating types is a slightly different genetic variant. Oh my God, you have it right there. Look at that. Look at
harvested some this morning for some medicine. So yeah, they're so beautiful. I don't know if you can all see that, but they're just absolutely gorgeous.
That's great. What are you going to use it for?
Making a tea, because I know it has really powerful anti-cancer and immunomodulating properties. So just make a nice medicinal tea.
Beautiful. Cool. Yeah, I was hoping later on we'll have some time. We can talk a little bit about herbal remedies and preparedness and treatment for coronavirus. I love this mushroom because it reminds us of all of the different possibilities, the thousands of different possibilities. If this mushroom has, 28,000 different mating types, and we have, close to about, 7 billion people on our planet, there are so many different possibilities for response to all the variety of crises that we have right now. And there is so much potential in that openness to all of the different possibilities. It also, I think, can remind us to adapt and shift. And if like one thing's not working, we can change, right? We don't need to be stuck in the same patterns. And keep our, if we're that mycelium on that log, it's that edge where we're moving forward, where most of our energy is at. And we're at that edge right now where we don't know what the future is going to hold. And wherever we are at the edge on those front lines, you know, might determine our future. Yeah, I mean, these are big transition times. And I think that our ability to adapt is going to really make a big difference right now. And there's so much we can learn about that from fungi. So can you, you know, I've got this, I can't move the chat box while I'm sharing the screen. Hold on, let me, I want to read these, but I also don't want to block the, oh, thank you so much, Anna, for your comment there in the chat box. That's really sweet. Thank you so much. Okay, so this mycopsychology thing, what am I talking about? There are a lot of different ideas that I've been playing with around this, and it's still definitely a work in progress. But really what I'm looking at is how can we work with fungi to deal with some of our most pressing problems and cultivate wholeness, rewild, and find our place in our human and ecological communities. Another way to think of it is the inner remediation, right? We don't want to need to just do remediation of our environments, but there's a lot of inner remediation that we need to do as well, both a physical and a psychological level. And I also think that because of the disconnect between humans and nature, and particularly the disconnect between fungi and humans, our reconnection with the fungal world can help us deal with some of these crises as well. And it's a part of that larger, what Joanna Macy calls the Great Turning. If folks aren't familiar, so Joanna Macy's an eco-psychologist, philosopher, and teacher who talks about the great unraveling, like all of this isolation and disconnect and destruction on our planet. And then what's also happening right now simultaneously is this thing called the Great Turning, where we're shifting towards a different way of being that's more ecologically and socially aligned. So yeah, so it's a lot of what I might be talking about is like, how do we find our place within the ecosystem of the Great Turning and within this shift that's happening. Mycopsychology, I have all these different activities that you could think about doing if you wanted to, and I'm excited to talk to people more about this and come up with new concepts and new ideas and new events and new workshops around it. So here we are, grounded as bioremediators, which is the work I think a lot of us are interested in doing. And like I said, you know, what we're wanting to do here is the inner remediation. So how can we not just, how can we work on multiple levels at the same time? And how can we do our bioremediation not just in conjunction with social reparations and community scale anti-oppression work, the way that Lila was talking about it last week, but also like how can we do some of this work within ourselves? And a lot of the bioremediation world, and why I think it's so important, is that it brings a lot of things to the surface where we can address them that have been pushed away or hidden from us. And traditional cleanup of toxic sites has a lot of times been just bulldozing it up and moving it to toxic waste landfill and then not having to think about it anymore, right? And as our world is getting smaller and smaller, we're having fewer and fewer places where we can just dump toxic stuff. And now so much of our planet has become toxic, and it's becoming really imperative that we address these toxins and work with it on a deeper level. We also have within, I will say, white culture, I'm going to just speak for white culture here, this pattern of suppressing feelings, suppressing things that we don't like about ourselves or other people might not like about us, and bearing it down where other people can't see it, and we might not even be able to see it ourselves. And there's absolutely also a need to bring that to the surface where we can work with it and process it. With both bioremediation and interremediation, you want to have a real container for that, though. You can't just like, oh, let's not, bring that to the landfill. We're going to remediate that. Leave it here. You can't just say that and not actually have a strategy, right? And the same thing with those emotions. You can't just like bring up a whole bunch of gnarly emotions and then be all alone and not have somebody to hold you through that, or any techniques or a space to work through that, right? So I think a lot of the important work that we can be doing right now is about creating not just those techniques, but that container for that work to happen. All right, so let's imagine again, this is fun, I like this part, that we are oh, can I go back to that metaphor really quick before moving on? I almost forgot I wanted to say something. Taylor and I were also talking about how COVID-19 is this deep chest sickness that seeps really deep into your body. And with any sickness, if it goes down too deep, it's harder to address. And so when we're looking at herbs and fungi that we can use to address it, a lot of what we're looking at is stuff that can help bring it to the surface, where our saliva and our immune system and our bloodstream, can address it a little bit better. So yeah, just holding that in our minds right now too. And I hope nobody's in the treatment phase of COVID-19 right now. Anybody? I'm hoping that I'm not, and that this chest cold is just a temporary passing thing. So we're going to talk about, but that might shift very dramatically over the next few weeks, right? For all of us, we'll see. So yeah, so we'll talk about both preparation and treatment. Okay, so imagine that we are a culture of a fungus on a petri dish, and there's not a lot to eat. It's kind of isolating, it's a little lonely. And then somebody drops a novel toxin, let's say creosote is an example that Trad Cotter uses in his presentation about this process. And that's something that maybe we haven't encountered before as this fungus. And we don't have the enzymes already made to be able to digest it. So what we're going to want to do is we're going to take some of our hyphal branches, we're going to lightly touch it, check it out, explore it. Right, observation before action, super key in any situation. And then we might bring those hyphae back in, and then you wait and see what happens. And what's happening here is the fungus is basically dipping into their ancestry and searching through their genetic library to see what enzymes they can create to digest this novel toxin. And a lot of times they will just be able to find that and put together the solution and transform what was this, this toxic thing that might have been actually really harmful to them at first. If they're just put on the, if you were to drop that creosote right on the unacclimated fungus, it might really damage it, might actually really hurt it. But once they've had time to really dip into their ancestry and genetic library, they'll be able to create, basically it's like the right key for the lock to break apart those hydrocarbon compounds and transform something that was toxic and polluting to them into food, into a source of nourishment. And there's a lot here I think that we can learn from. If we are, if folks might be familiar with the concept of the wounded healer, which is somebody, whose healing powers are enhanced by all of the wounds that they've incurred in their own personal experience of healing, can teach them how they can heal others. And so I think there are a lot of things in our current situation that we can learn from and become more powerful healers by coming into contact and observing, and then dipping into our own ancestry, which is part of the reason, we had that activity in the homework. Like, what do we have? What tools do we have in our own ancestry to deal with the current situation? And how can, obviously our ancestors did not deal with this situation. They didn't have coronavirus, and that's why, or climate change to the degree, or any of these crises, right? Well, maybe some of them, but not most of what I'm talking about right now. And so, but they did deal with a lot of other really crazy stuff that might have been similar in certain ways. So it's really this matter of connecting with our ancestry and what's behind us and adapting that to the current situation. So holding on to the past while being changeable and fluid in the way that we address the future. Any thoughts or questions at this point? Okay, I'll just keep going. I'll just keep going. All right. So as we are developing solutions and coming up with strategies for toxic pollution or any of the myriad of crises here, I mean, I'm making a lot of broad generalizations, but I think generally we've been on this, trying to go this highway route to our solutions, where we're like, okay, we're just gonna get there from A to B. We're gonna take these steps along the way. We're gonna fill up on gas. We're gonna get there. And not only are you releasing more fossil fuels if you take your car, but you might miss out on a lot of the cool stuff along the way, and a lot of the opportunity, and a lot of the deeper connection and deeper healing that may happen. And we may realize that, like, if we're acting like a fungus, there is no destination. We're moving, we're expanding, we're growing outward, but we're not trying to get from A to B. We're trying to be a part of this entire network of life, right? And we're connecting with all of these different pieces and moving in all these different ways and constantly adapting to whatever shifts and changes are happening around us. So also when we're faced with difficult times, there's really this question of what networks do we have that we can rely on? It's becoming really apparent in the case of the coronavirus that we can't necessarily rely on our government or corporations or our healthcare system to take care of us right now. And we have to rely also on our more informal networks and social networks and ecological networks, all of our plant and fungal allies here, to be able to well, hopefully not just survive, but thrive, right? And get through this together. And it's, like I said, like nobody should be expected to do this work alone, and it really has to be a collaborative process. And if you think about a mycorrhizal fungi, I think we talked about this in one of our classes, but if you're not familiar, there's this incredible process by which a tree who has an abundance of resources will actually share those resources with a struggling sapling that's not getting enough sunlight via the mycorrhizal fungal network. So fungi actually act as a kind of a social worker of the underground world, or a networker, where they can distribute water, minerals, and even glucose, which they don't create themselves, to the places where they're most needed, and invest in the future generations, which will then, one day give back to that ecosystem. And I'm thinking a lot about our future generations right now, as I'm sure many of us are, and how we can support them, how we can take things where there, abundant resources from one place and support those who are struggling. And at the same time, those mother trees, the ones that we're holding that wisdom, we can think of as our elders, who we also need to be thinking about a lot right now, and who are at most risk from coronavirus and from a lot of health issues. And so we can really, if we're thinking like a mushroom here about how we want to support our communities in dealing with the coronavirus, it can be, we can think about who's most vulnerable right now, and where is there an abundance and where is there a need, and how can we be that link between them. I'm going to get into this later, actually. I wanted to, where did I, oh, this is okay. I wanted to bring forth some questions. Does anybody, Taylor, did you want to chime in here? Yeah, this would be a great time if you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, I'm having just a lot of thoughts and feelings come up surrounding all of the mycelial metaphors, both in my interpersonal life and kind of what's going on in greater scale communities and with our global family right now. I can't think of anything in particular that I want to chime in on. I think you covered a great deal of kind of what I'm feeling, and especially loving those correlations in the mycorrhizal network and how the allocation of resources is so important and so vital in the holistic health of an ecosystem. I feel like I use that metaphor a lot in talking about the allocation of resources, both materially and energetically. Like if you are feeling abundant in your life, how can you therefore share that abundance with the people and with the space around you, and tend to what's present around you right now. But other than that, I don't have too many words right now. But yeah, if anything comes up, I'll let you know. I'll like do a little finger dance, and I'd love to chime in at some point.
Awesome. Yeah, feel free to do the beep, bloop, or whatever we do.
Bloop.
Bloop. Awesome. Thank you so much, Taylor. I'm wondering if anybody else wants to share anything that's coming up, any insights or thoughts or feelings that are coming up for you right now. I know it's hard to do vulnerable shares with people via the online format. We're also spread apart.
Well, I love metaphors. Like, that has been one of my favorite things about mycology, is that they're just everywhere. Like, you can't think about fungus without seeing how it reflects back to your own humanity. So those are really powerful, the ones that you just talked about. And I just am thinking of how much everyone could benefit by thinking this way of like, we can take destruction and even fear and just like transform it into something positive and uplifting for everyone. And yeah, healing is just like such a messy process. It's really too bad that like a lot of the time it takes a crisis for someone to really recognize like what's been going wrong and what needs to happen to heal and recover. And yeah, I think this virus is like a wake-up call for so many people of like, oh, I need to reach out to the most vulnerable people in my family or in my life and like make sure that they're gonna be okay, or you know, try to help from far away. Like my whole family lives in St. Louis and I'm here in Colorado, and I'm like, but you know, just like still focusing on what you can control and like, yeah, just doing the healing from the inside out before you can really reach out to other people is super important.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I wanted to add about the fungal metaphors, and something that has really helped in my healing process, is the fact that they act as such a bridge between, you know, the entities of life and death, as well as the light world and the underworld. And you can, you know, take that in whatever way feels the best for you, but how in every healing and transformation process, you know, there is darkness and decay and that like depth unknown of the rhizosphere, and all the work that we kind of have to do in those shadowy waters, the shadowy realms of ourselves, to be able to sequester the nutrients and energy we need to come forth out of the ground and shine as the beautiful mushroom, and then spread those spores forth into the world. So really seeing that as like a essential and cyclical part of the healing process. I think they do a good job at allowing us to be more gentle with ourselves as we explore those shadowy parts.
Yeah, they're definitely the holders of that transformation between life and death. Yeah.
I wanted to say that I really enjoyed your description of the mycelium in the petri dish when a foreign sort of agent is introduced, that there's the gentle contact at first, like observation before action. That really hit me because I feel drawn to observe like on a deep level, and sort of that's like my natural impulse is to go there first when I meet changing environments, or basically just going out in the day. There are so many things that I feel pressure to act quickly, but actually like my wisdom is to make a little bit of contact and observe, and then kind of go back into myself. And that just feels really validating that the fungi do that also.
That's actually the secret agenda for this workshop right now.
Nice.
Is for us all to take a moment and observe and assess and breathe and notice what's going on inside ourselves and in the world around us, so that we can act from a more grounded and informed place. So thank you for bringing that up.
A saying that's really been sticking with me throughout all of this, it's really short and succinct, but how do we slow down in urgent times? And like the medicine that's inherently within that pausing and that slow approach through observation.
Awesome. So let's have more discussion. I've got some questions. For those who arrived late, if you hadn't noticed, I kind of tailored this whole presentation to focus a little bit more on not just the coronavirus as an example of, you know, a thing that we might encounter if we're thinking of fungal metaphor, like a pollutant we might encounter on our journey, and how we're going to face it, how we're going to deal with it. And then I think I want to talk about some of our longer emergencies, such as the climate change, the climate crisis. Oh, look, Mia's here. Hi, Mia. That makes me so happy. So we're gonna have a discussion now, and if you would like to bring us your faces, we'd love to see your beautiful faces. For these questions, you have several options. You can just think about it inside your head. You can write your response in the chat box, or you can, if you want to share, we'll have an opportunity to share our answers out loud. So thinking like a mushroom here, if we are in that process of feeling out and sussing out the situation of COVID-19 as an example here, what of it has already permeated our membrane? For those of you who are less familiar with the fungal biology, the hyphae will go out and certain things will come in and certain things will not come in. And the fungi kind of get to choose, and they can sense their environment and decide what to let in. I think for many of us, this has already affected our inner landscape quite a bit. So I want to just take a moment to notice, how has this whole situation affected us? How are we changed by it? How have we already reacted or responded to it? Oh, and I wanted to say something before we actually share back our responses, that the purpose of this exercise is not to fix anything or find the right answers for anything. This is an exploration, right? We're in that exploration observation phase. And there's room here in this Zoom container for all of our feelings, all of our thoughts, all of our opinions, we're each empowered to make our own decisions about what we're going to do, right? And so I would like to request that we not actually respond to each other's responses very much, if we can avoid it. And we're not going to be like correcting each other or trying to fix each other's answers. This is just more a place to explore. So would anybody like to share out loud or on the chat box about how this has affected you? I can share for myself, I'm feeling more anxiety than usual. Does anybody else have that experience? You can twinkle your fingers. Yeah, it's adding a lot of stress in my work situation. Anybody else having more stressful work situations? Yeah, twinklies. All right, I'll move to the next one. So the next question is, how do we want to relate to it? We just thought about how we are relating to it and how it's affecting us. How do you want to be relating to it? Remember in that visualization, like, okay, we're interacting with all of these different elements here. How do we want to relate to them?
I guess I could comment on that. I think comparing myself and my feelings with other of my friends, I am feeling very unemotional and kind of like not stressed out, not afraid. And maybe that's because I don't have TV and live in Alaska, which just feels very isolated. But I think I would also like to maybe feel like I care more. I don't know. But then, I mean, from my position of like being young and healthy and not feeling afraid, I've been reaching out to people more. And like I wrote a letter just now to a friend who sort of like self-quarantined himself. He just got back from Japan. So just in case, because I feel like he might be feeling kind of lonely. So I guess just keeping up connections with people.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Ooh, Anne, thank you for mentioning the social distancing. I'm curious if folks have responses or thoughts about that.
I think Ariel brought it up first in the chat, that it's interesting that it's part of our collective response, and I really want to take the opportunity to make sure that that we find other ways of connecting.
Yeah, obviously Zoom is one of them. Here we all are. We're like some of the few people whose class wasn't canceled today. What other ways can we support each other? And, you know, given how isolated our society already is, and how all of this intense separation, with all of these social distancing things going on, how can we stay connected? And how can we build stronger networks instead of letting our networks get weaker? I'm curious what thoughts. Yeah.
This isn't exactly an answer to that, but just a thought that I feel like there is so much isolation, like you say, in our society, but it's often not shared. Like we don't share how alone we feel. And this almost evens the playing field. So like we're all explicitly acknowledging that we're sort of pulling away from each other, and there's not so much shame around it. I don't know, that's just a thought.
That's really interesting, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I got a really interesting email yesterday that was, it's a group of organizers near here who said this is the opportunity. When you look at those world maps and you see the pollution is less, way less, it's like this opportunity to reboot the way we do fuel, because we have evidence that if everybody stopped and stayed home, we would be polluting so much less. And so she was actually really excited about the opportunity, and all the organizing was taking place online. It's not like we were going to go have a demonstration, but, you know, writing letters, sharing this idea with other people, that there is something positive coming out of it.
I think there's a really kind of going off of that, there's this really interesting aspect that based on the the fears around international travel and things like that, we're kind of being forced to come in closer to our place, you know, like having more of a sense of our bioregional place and maybe our more tight-knit communities, and not looking so far out like internationally, but coming really back home to like what is currently present around us, and having our minds not being casted so far out and not feeling like we need to go here or there, like kind of reducing the movement. So coming back home to like close community and the people around us. And I think that's a really interesting variable of what's coming out of the prevention of travel and things. And we could actually use that to our benefit in a lot of ways, to kind of reassess of what is really present around me and who is around me, and be really resilient in our micro communities right now.
Right. So international travel, even, you know, car travel, is something that humans have only had for such a tiny little slice of our human history, right? And now we're saying, oh, it's impossible to live without that, right? I mean, we'll talk about the climate crisis in a little bit, but I want to be, my next question here is, what tools do we have in our own history and our own ancestry, both our genetics, you know, like all of our ancestors, every single one of your ancestors was a badass because they survived and they were able to make you, right? And their offspring survived. So all of us have, you know, incredible survivalists in our ancestry. So what tools can we draw on, not just from our own history, but then our cultural history, our societal history, our biospherical history, our ecological history, and within those, our relationships with all of those things that we still have. Don't worry, even if we're social distancing, we still have all those relationships. What do we have from that history that we can bring to this certain situation? So if we're that mycelium on the petri dish, you know, how do we want to adapt what we pull out of our ancestry to this current situation? What tools do we have?
Well, Maya, you were, you know, mentioning how right now the relationship and the trust that we have with our government and healthcare system and a lot of those things is a little bit fissured right now. And so personally, for me, I've really been coming back in tune with botanical and fungal medicines, and just the whole concept of preventative healthcare. Like, how can I strengthen my immune system now before anything happens? And we can take that to like a bigger picture of how can we strengthen our resilience but before a crisis happens, rather than trying to find and feeling this sense of urgency to find a solution while it's happening or after it happens. And I think that can tap back into our ancestors' relationship with place, utilizing the medicines, the wild medicines that are growing in that place, that are, you know, interacting with the same bacteria and viruses and are creating novel compounds that we can use for our own resilience, coming back into the relationship with those medicines. Just like radical self-reliance.
And community reliance. Yeah. Even if you didn't get a chance to research your own family's history with fungi, I'm just curious if there's anything that's coming up for you right now, like what grandparents or great-grandparents did you have? What did they go through? And even if you're just imagining it, or you just read about it in like a book about people from the country that maybe you have some ancestors from, like what tools might they have had? Or what about our pre-industrial ancestors as well? I mean, I think they have a lot to teach us right now about how to survive and how to live in community and how to be a part of our ecosystem.
I've seen a lot of my friends sharing songs over Facebook and stuff. And I think singing is really important singing together. My birthday was just last week, and I had a bunch of friends over, and we sang like some of our favorite songs. And that kind of, I know we shouldn't have like lots of large gatherings, but you can still share over Facebook or you record yourself singing a song. And I think that a lot of music can be very healing. And I haven't seen any songs about COVID-19, but maybe some of these.
That's a good one. My birthday was last week too, Kristen. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday.
I love this comment that David just wrote. I'm going to read this out loud. In the Northlands, community was often I think you meant to say product of adversity. Great care was taken, especially of the needs of the elderly and the young. Beautiful. So my last question here is, what can we learn from this? And what, from this whole experience of dealing with COVID-19, can we apply to other crises that most certainly will also come to the surface in the coming years? What can we learn from this, and what adaptations can we make to all of this change? I wish I had a better answer for this. I'm so curious if anybody else has thoughts on that.
Well, I'm thinking about what you mentioned earlier with kind of paradigm shift and the great turning, sort of keeping in mind the bigger picture with crisis, because it can feel so scary to be in the moment, which is good to stay present, but knowing that some sort of transformation will come from such upheaval is something that I have just recently started to experience, like in a very tangible physical way of like, oh, like healing from a chronic issue is part of breaking out of the cocoon and like becoming a new butterfly, or like just transforming into something that you wouldn't get to if there wasn't a struggle. So kind of just trusting in the process almost of like, yes, there will be loss and there's plenty of room, like grief is so necessary in that process. But like there's light, kind of what Taylor was saying about coming up from the underground, and like there's light waiting on the other side. And yeah, just that it's not like, I think some of the people in power like want the rapture and like they want the end of the world, but we're like, no, like we're gonna figure out some way to take all of this mess and like remediate it and transform it into something else.
I haven't really found the words to articulate this, but I have a little bit of hope building on that. Thank you, Anna. About that this is, bringing together threads that we've talked about bringing things to the surface that we all are aware of, the illnesses that and the toxicity that we want to remediate. But now it's leveling the playing field. Everybody's seeing it, and all the vulnerable that are being impacted by COVID are also the ones that are frontline because of economic inequity and toxic exposures over many periods of time, and all the things that we've all worked on collectively. And so I'm hoping, and I don't see it yet, but maybe it's too early in the upheaval, but I feel like other people are going to start seeing that shadow as well and start to address it in different ways that we don't know, and all those possibilities that you brought up, Maya, because they are all the possibilities that the mycelium offer us. Sorry, I'm not feeling very articulate about this yet, but because it's so emergent. But that's my hope as well. So thank you all for all your words and putting words to all these things. Yeah,
this is really not a time where I think, Taylor and I were also talking about this. It's really hard to articulate what's going on for us right now, because it's so, like you said, it's really emergent, and we're all in process here. And I just really want to encourage folks to just speak from the heart and not worry about how it sounds or any of that.
Well, I wanted to say that I feel like the interconnectedness is super apparent, like the mycelial network that we're all part of in little nodes of has never been more apparent to me, because we can all affect each other so much just by our actions, just by going out or touching something. I mean, it's pretty intense reality, realization of that. But I also think it's super important that we interconnect on who's in charge and how we participate in making sure we trust who's in charge, because it's clear that that makes a huge difference in a situation like this. And I hope we can work together on that.
I hope so too. Let's get one more share and then we'll move on. Or we could just move on.
I have something I would love to say. And this kind of revolves around accountability, but how I've just seen this pattern continuously happening where this big upheaval happens and everyone's talking about this one thing, and all the social media posts are firing and we're all here discussing it and trying to figure out solutions. And then it's like we reach that threshold, but then it is solved and it dwindles down, and then it's kind of like, oh, business as usual. Like, I'm really hoping that from this and from the continual upsurgence of these crises, that we can continue to have these conversations and reach those thresholds and come to solutions and actually like hold ourselves accountable to implement them. You can see that both on a personal healing process and like this global scale healing process. But how do we hold ourselves accountable and the space around us accountable to take the lessons that we learn from these crises and integrate them, and not just go back to business as usual, because that's like the safe way. It's kind of like almost like a cop out. But how can we like really step up and use these lessons to transform and like reconfigure ourselves and society? But that's really hard, and I don't know how to do that. It's
Well, unfortunately we have a global emergency that's way more terrifying than COVID-19, which is climate change, and far more terrifying. Unfortunately, affects everybody, all life. And so I think, what Ellen was saying about how we need, this could be an opportunity. And yeah, we don't want to go back to business as usual. How can we, build these networks and address this other emergency as well? And not that like, I don't want to play emergency Olympics here and pretend, I want to call myself out for framing it in more than or less than, because it's all pressing, and it's and just because you take one thing seriously doesn't mean you take something less seriously. But it is true that like, we have this very like acute situation. This like, okay, this is happening right now. It's scary. It's big. How can we, and we get all of this energy and interest in solving it, as we should, of course. And we have this chronic illness on our planet that is a much more of a long-term thing that also requires a mass scale coordinated response from humans. So thinking about that, and thinking about the climate crisis, thinking about the loss of biodiversity, and the loss of habitat for humans and for animals and for life on this planet, and what's happening there. Who here experiences climate anxiety? Anxiety about the climate? There's this new term for it called solastalgia, which is, I think it also refers to like when you feel kind of guilty because the sun's shining, but it's really the rainy season and it should be raining, it's like, oh, I feel really weird about this, and this like uncomfortableness in the like not fully feeling the impact of climate change, but knowing that there's something really scary coming, So my first question, should you choose to answer it, is how has climate change affected your inner landscape, your inner ecosystem? How has it permeated that hyphal membrane and entered your world? How have you responded to it? We'll give folks another minute to, like, you can write this down for yourself, write it down in the chat box. Does anybody want to share aloud? Yeah.
Yeah. Part of my whole health challenge is really getting in touch with my nervous system and the role that it plays, because I feel like you're not taught that in school really. So yeah, nervous system, anxiety and stress, and the physical responses in the body. I've always been a pretty anxious person, but in the last 6 months, I've figured out ways to deal with it that are a lot more healthy than what I may have done before. And I think that's probably the first step in being an active community member, in the sense that you're using your capacity and your talent to help others, and just that mutual aid of like, what can I do even though everything's seemingly collapsing. If you don't have your own ways of like managing anxiety and stress, then it's going to be a lot harder to make space, I guess, for your other capabilities to come to the surface. So yeah, for me, it's been finding how to like grieve what we're losing and learn from like the fungi and the other really resilient organisms that can teach us ways of pushing through. And as Donna Haraway would say, staying with the trouble. So like not saying that we're gonna have a utopia or an apocalypse, but something totally in the middle, like just figuring out where that balance lies.
Absolutely. Yeah, I've noticed, I've been, working with climate anxiety and with kid groups for a while, and I've noticed that there used to be just, and with adults too, there's like this denial for so long. Oh, it's really not that bad. We're going to be okay. And then they realize, oh, whoa, it actually is really bad. We're having these wildfires. We're having these droughts. We're, all this stuff. And then they go right over to despair. It's too hard. We can't solve it. We might as well just keep burning fossil fuels and give up. It's like, so where is that space in between, like, where's that sweet spot where we take it seriously, but we don't we don't just give up because it's too hard, because we don't actually have a choice if we want to, keep caring for our future generations. We do have to deal with it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, we've got some great shares here on the chat. Is anybody else noticing that it's like a little bit hard to think about the climate crisis right now on top of what's happening with COVID-19? Okay, cool. So we can just keep that in mind, and maybe this isn't the time to like fully digest all of our climate anxiety and unpack all of that. But I do want to just kind of, so I'll go through these a little quickly. We don't have to dwell too deeply. My next question is, how do we want to relate to it? What kind of a relationship do we want to have to the climate crisis? And then what tools do we have in our own history and ancestry? These are the same questions as the last thing, if you didn't notice. Both genetic and cultural, and within our relationship with our biosphere, what tools do we have to adapt to this? And what learnings can we get out of this situation? How can we learn and then adapt to address this novel situation? Anybody want to share a response to any of those questions out loud?
I can. So one thing that I've been doing around climate change is because there's these like big they're big concepts and they can really feel like a lot, but I've been working in kind of like my local community and what can I do in small ways that help me express that I'm like, these things are happening and find community around it. So we're really fortunate in Santa Cruz to have a pretty active Extinction Rebellion group, and like showing up to those actions and being part of it. And then also I do like little craftivism things, and I make media around like these things that I like I struggle with, and share that and try to start these conversations. And I found that has really taken away a lot of this like bigger kind of like worries about climate change, and just having these little ripple effects in my day-to-day.
Beautiful. Thanks, Avery. If anybody's got a burning share they want to share, they can, or we can move on. All right, thanks. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, we could talk all day about ways that we can address the climate crisis, and we should talk all day about it. I so appreciate you sharing your ways, Avery. I wanted to save some time here on this call to talk a little bit about ways that we can work with fungi more directly for preventing or supporting our bodies with a case of COVID-19. We actually thought about having a mycomedicinals component to this workshop, to this course, and then we're like, oh, there's just too many things and we can't fit it in, and we want to focus a little bit more on restoration, so we didn't include it. So we're doing it kind of imperfectly, and but I think our collective knowledge here in this group, I think we could share some really great insights. So if you're not familiar with reishi or lingzhi, Ganoderma lucidum, it's a fantastic immune supporter. It also increases blood flow and just your general energy. And it does it in the way that, echinacea is something that stimulates your immune system, whereas reishi is something that actually supports and nourishes your immune system. Same with a lot of the other mycomedicinals, like turkey tail, for example. So if you have or can get your hands on some reishi, I think this is a really great time to be taking care of your body with that. It's also an antiviral and in general antimicrobial. So it wouldn't hurt to be taking some. If you can, I think there's a lot of different people that debate different ways of consuming it. You can take the supplements, which I think it's a little bit less absorbable. I think the best way, in my opinion, is double extraction or triple extraction. Some people do triple extractions with honey, but at least alcohol and a water extraction, you get more of the medicinal benefits that way. So if you can get reishi tincture, I think that's a great tool. Or if you just have dried mushrooms, you can make a tea, and you're at least getting a lot of the good water soluble medicinal components. Same with turkey tail. Most of everything I just said is applicable to turkey tail. If you're on the West Coast here, we don't have, and you want to just harvest your own, there's Ganoderma applanatum. Or I'm sorry, it was called that here. Now we call it Ganoderma brownii, which grows all over the place in our forest. Oh, look at Kane. You got a little reishi kit right there. Beautiful, gorgeous. Good for you. Yeah, artist conch, exactly, which has a lot of the same medicinal benefits. And you can find growing out in forest. Forest is a great place to be right now, by the way. I don't know if you've been out lately, but I highly recommend it. Oh, thanks. Taylor's gonna write out some of the common names. And Mia, are you still here? Mia knows a lot about mycomedicinals, and so does Taylor. And I'm wondering if either of you would like to chime in here with any thoughts.
I'm here.
Okay.
I mean, the main thought is just if you're going to do some sort of a tincture, a lot of the alkaloids will come out with heat, and then other alkaloids will come out with like alcohol or extracts. So it's often a good idea to mix those, like a tea and an extract. So I don't know if you already covered that, but that's an important thing to consider, that processing them differently for different alkaloids is helpful.
Awesome. I know a lot of people have been talking about cordyceps lately too. I've been, there's this really incredible herbalist named Stephen Herod Buhner, who came up with a protocol for dealing with the coronavirus. And I can share the link to his protocol, but of the medicinal mushrooms, he recommends cordyceps. And if folks aren't familiar with cordyceps, they're the ones that grow parasitically on insects. And it's interesting. Well, we could go into that. There's a lot to say about cordyceps, but I'll just say that there's been some really innovative cultivation techniques where instead of just making medicine out of the mycelium of them, they're now able to grow the fruiting bodies of cordyceps, which are a bit more potent medicine. I'm going to share this resource in the chat box. Anybody else want to say anything about mycomedicinals as prevention or treatment for coronavirus?
One mycological, well, I guess I could say lichenological ally comes to mind, very prolific in the Pacific Northwest. Her name is Usnea. It's a very common lichen, and I've used the medicine for both urinary tract health, but it's also very good respiratory medicine. And since the coronavirus targets the respiratory system, I think that Usnea could be a really, really great ally for protecting our respiratory health. It's also an expectorant, so it helps like bring mucus up and out. I usually just go out and harvest it and make teas with it. You could do a similar like tincture or extraction process with the Usnea as you do with mushrooms, like the double or triple extraction with the alcohol and the water. But I've heard with Usnea, you have to do something a little bit different. So I just make a general tea with the Usnea and then drink the tea with other like yummy herbs because it doesn't taste the best. So I'll put some like mint in there or whatever feels good. So Usnea is a great ally.
Oh, thanks, Karen. Look at that. Beautiful. Yeah, I've been collecting both the Usnea longissima and Usnea barbata, which have both been proven to be good as antivirals and general antimicrobials. And my thoughts on Usnea are this. I've been thinking about Usnea a lot lately, so I'm glad you brought that up. I think, yeah, it definitely, if you have an acute infection and it's really bad, I think it could be a good treatment. I've been consulting with some of my herbalist friends, and they're just not sure. Nobody really knows exactly what the best treatment is going to be for coronavirus, of course. But it also, something to keep in mind about it, though, is that it does hyperaccumulate heavy metals. All of the lichens and all of the mushrooms as well tend to hyperaccumulate heavy metals. So it's not something that I would use unless I really needed it. And it's a really powerful medicine too. When I only use it when I get like a really bad cold that like is just deep in my chest and I can't get it out any other way, is when I use it. So yeah, it's just one to be careful with. It's also it's abundant here on the West Coast and in a lot of places. And so you don't have to worry too much about overharvesting, but I always, pull it off of a stick that's already fallen on the ground, like if it's about to start decomposing, and keeping in mind that it is very slow growing. So you want to be just mindful how you harvest it.
I just wanted to say that if you don't have like a special stash of dried medicinals or they're not growing wild where you are, you don't have time to go find them. There is always Host Defense, Paul Stamets. I know he's popular and everything, but he makes pretty good like mycelium supplements for immunity. And then I found it really helpful in explaining to people, you know, with this general discussion around immunity, I get really excited because I'm like, mushrooms. And people, tend to have this like skeptical look on their faces. But if you explain their role in the ecosystem of like fighting off pathogens, you don't even have to get into the chemistry of it for people to be like, oh, I guess that makes sense. Like if they're there, especially in symbiosis with plants to like ward off bacteria and viruses, then all of a sudden it makes sense to people like, oh, that could help my body as well. So that's just a tip that I've thought of in this conversation.
Microbial antagonism. Great phrase. Exactly. Yeah, and if you think about like reishi and why that is specifically, so powerful is that they're slow growing. And they, are gonna like, they're making a long-term investment in their substrate. And they tend to stick around for a while for being a saprotroph, right? So they're like, okay, I'm gonna set up shop. I'm gonna have some super powerful antifungal, bacterial, antiviral stuff. I'm just gonna like set up shop. Nobody's gonna mess with me. I'm gonna take my time growing out my fruiting body, one step at a time. Yeah. Kane, how long did it take for those mushrooms to get to that size?
Sorry, I had to find the mute button. That's been about, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. So yeah, fairly slow growing. Yeah, probably could have had them in a better grow environment. So yeah, but I'm seeing growth every day, so that's nice. It's fun to watch.
That's great. Yeah.
But the colonization of the block took a while. It took about 2 months. So because I grew up from tissue culture. So.
Oh, great. Cool.
One thing that's interesting in thinking about fungal viral interactions is that fungi could host a number of viruses in their bodies as they're growing. I don't know if any of you ever heard about the endophyte that was in a plant that helped the plant withstand heat at the thermal heat vent. But it was a virus that was in the endophyte that allowed that plant to be able to withstand that. So we're just thinking about all of these ways for fungi to combat viruses, but they can also host them as well.
I don't think any of our saprotrophs that we work with, though, like, would have that potential, right? It's just endophytes?
I don't know. I actually think that there's a lot of interactions that viruses have with different fungi from different trophic levels. They're just coming in contact with them a lot, and the virus needs a host to be able to replicate and grow. So, I wouldn't be surprised. By the time they're dried and we're using them, I don't think we should worry too much about ingesting any viruses in the fungus. But it's worth mentioning, I think. I always want to consider these things because we often turn to the fungi as a panacea, like a heal-all for all of our ailments, and they are doing an enormous amount of good for us and for the planet. But they also have to make a living and fend for themselves out there. So, certainly a lot of the microbial antagonism or symbioses, a lot of that may be quite self-serving as well for the fungi. But fungi have to consider their own personal resilience just as we need to.
Awesome. There are also a lot of plant allies out there that we can work with for both, preventatively and protection-wise and treatment-wise with the coronavirus. Another great plant that helps bring stuff to the surface that's deep down is called Yerba Santa. If folks are familiar with that, it grows out here in California. It's also really powerful. And then I think I don't think we have time to go too deep into, Basics of Herbalism 101, but I think that there are a lot of really great antiviral and antifungal, antiviral plants out there that we could be working with. Yeah. Does anybody want to say anything else? And then I want to transition back into a little exercise for us.
I don't think anyone's mentioned chaga. I might have just not heard.
Oh,
but
great.
I have some chaga tea too. This is one that grows in Alaska and Russia, and I think Canada, pretty much anywhere where birch trees are. It only grows on birch, and it's very good for immune boosting.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Mia's got some too. Yay. It's like your chagas are high-fiving each other. Does make a lovely chai. Any last comments or thoughts on this, any of these topics before we move on? All right. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with y'all again. And let's get back here. All right, so I'm curious. I don't know if people read the article I sent, but I want us to be thinking like a mushroom and how we're going to network and transform things that are dead and dying into something new, and the cycles of life. And Taylor mentioned the cycles. And so I wanted to bring out a tool that I use a lot. I used it for designing the curriculum of this course. I use it for when I'm working with kids. I use it when I'm planning out big projects in my life. And it's a way of just kind of framing a lot of this work that I found really useful. And so I wanted to share this with y'all and then get your thoughts as well. So I want to also be conscious of like where this comes from. So this comes from a European tradition. In Western Europe, there's elemental magic, some people call it, where you use the 4 directions and the 4 elements and bring them together in this way. Some people use a 5 elemental system, and the pentagram is part of that. There also are a lot of indigenous cultures around the world who use this system, as well as including indigenous people of where I live, who use a similar system. Different people have different wheels and do this in a lot of different ways. I'll just say that. And so what I'm going to share with you is the way that works well for me, and that I've adapted towards fungi. Let's say we are starting a new project, and we're starting a new endeavor. We would call that the East, where the element is air. We can also think of this as the spore that's floating around. For those of you who are here for the beginning, we were that spore with so much possibility and so much unknown, and we're exploring and we're finding, and we're not sure what's going to happen, but there's so much opportunity for something else to happen. This is also the season of spring. It's the moment of birth. It's the dawn in the morning. And then, as the spore lands on some kind of substrate, it's going to have to get busy. It's going to have to eat, and it's going to have to find water and move through that substrate. And ideally, it will find another partner, or 2 or 3 or 4 or more. Remember, Willoughby spoke about the sporgy that happens when you have multiple hyphal branches coming together and creating a wider mycelial network. So this is the time of like that networking, that coming together, and the like, oh, look at these genetics that you have. Let's swap them out. And like, oh, it looks like you're really good at digesting this kind of cellulose. Let's work together. So this is, the direction is the south, and the element here is fire. And it's the time of the day when you're like working really, really hard. When you're like, okay, got to get to business, got to get things done. And there's a big energy output. And then as you move into the west, that's more of the time of harvesting. And that's when the fungi would put out a fruiting body. And this is also the time of water and interconnection and community. And as we're moving through here, we're thinking about, you know, how can we give back to those who are maybe starting out in the east? As you know, you can draw like lines between the different directions. Like, how are we connected to those who are just starting their journey and are struggling right now? And how can we build a stronger, more resilient network and maybe put away some food for the winter and prepare for the next phase? And then this time is also when I would say, you know, as we're moving into the Northwest, this is the time that when things have become overgrown, it becomes important to, especially important for the saprotrophic fungi to come in and digest them and turn that into healthy soil. So I would call the North that time, that's like, it's the dream time, it's the imagination, it's where you're creating that fertile substrate for something new to come up next year. And then, you know, putting out those spores that would then be released the following year. So I'm thinking about my ecosystem where I live, which is, I live in Santa Cruz, California, and we have these incredible oak meadows. The indigenous people of this land tended it by setting what we call controlled burns fairly regularly on this, you know, complicated schedule of burning in different places. And the ecosystem that they evolved with, you know, is of course adapted to that. So when we don't have fire for a long period, when we have, you know, this fire suppression and people build their houses in areas that are supposed to get burned, we have this buildup of dead wood. And I think that's a lot of what we have in our society right now, is like a lot of excess. We have a lot of waste. We have, you know, overfilled landfills. And we have a lot that we've created that we don't necessarily know how to digest. We have a lot of pollution. We have a lot of feelings that we don't know what to do with. We have a lot that's come to the surface. And I think that, you know, in this time of the Northwest, this is when it's critical to be transforming that, all of that that's been built up, and grow mushrooms on it. So I actually have I have a project planned on Saturday that it looks like we're going to cancel. I'm pretty sure we're going to have to cancel it because of the coronavirus, which is really heartbreaking. But I have a group of kids, and our plan is to go to this oak meadow where there's a lot of this built up wood, and chip it and soak it using the cold water fermentation method, which is a great way to prepare your substrate without using fossil fuels. And then inoculate it with Stropharia rugosa annulata, the garden giant, and basically be, you know, preventing a catastrophic wildfire from being as bad. So we're also going to do some oak tending and just like some basic things like adding ash to the soil and pulling off excess moss and taking down dead branches and things like that to tend to our oak forests. If you can't do a fire, you know, the question I have is like, okay, if we can't do fire, how can we work with fungi? How can we mimic fire? And also, like, let's apply this all to an organization, right? So if you're a part of an institution that's become more obsolete or isn't able to reach its goals, like, or we have an entire economic and social system that obviously isn't serving a lot of us, and is failing in a lot of ways. Like, what can we decompose and what can we transform? And then how can we vision and imagine a different future? And then how can we start from that fertile substrate? How can we start, I don't know, maybe it's an organization, maybe it's just an informal gathering of people. I mean, my question for you now is to be thinking about what you've learned in this course and what you've learned in your life about MycoRenewal and ways that we can work with fungi. And how do you want to apply that? And what do you want to do with that? Yeah, actually, let's take a moment here. And I'm just really curious if folks would like to share. This is our last, time with everybody here. And we are going to have a post-course integration piece for some of us. Not everybody will be there. So while we're all here, I am so curious to hear what sorts of new projects or new things are you imagining? Maybe you'll actually do them, maybe you won't, but what are you thinking about doing with this, with what you've learned? And you can write in the chat box if you want.
I would really like to invest more time in mycoremediation and investing time researching that and setting up little projects. I guess particularly looking at like urban situations where there's lots of land that need restoration. So, yeah. How to do that, I'm not really sure. And I would love to come over to America and visit some projects over there and see what you're all doing, because there's not really a lot here in Australia. So it's kind of fascinating to watch to see what you're all up to there.
Beautiful. We definitely need stronger mycelial networks in the post-fire restoration world between California and Australia.
Yep.
I've been really involved with food justice since I was like 15. I got really lucky and had a high school teacher who introduced me to the concept, and it was really personal. And so now it's just like been very directive for me, like a passion that I can follow with some tangibility. And then as soon as mushrooms came into the picture, just fungi in general, I was like, wow, like food and medicine, and also soil building, like we're not really going to be able to sustain, the regenerative agriculture practices that we want unless we can build really healthy soils. So I just want to find a way to incorporate fungal knowledge into the food justice organizations that I'm already involved with here. And then hopefully I've thought about someday going back to Missouri. St. Louis doesn't have as many mycological resources as Colorado does in general. But I know that the mushrooms are out there and that the need for that knowledge is definitely there. So some type of, I love working with kids too. So education around fungi as food and medicine and forest ecology and just how we can ally with fungi in the future.
Awesome.
Where I live, we are kind of have a lot of those like super large poultry houses. And I'm interested in finding a way of like inoculating to help use mushrooms to break down a lot of the waste that comes out of those. That gets sold to farmers that spread it on their fields, but just ways to make it less noxious, I think would be useful. And I'm looking into, and I should let everyone know because these are coming up in the US, at least in my region, the SARE grants, which are SARE USDA grants. And those, the one that's coming up in our region is the like farm partnership one. And I guess depending on where you are, they might be sort of competitive, but they're always, it's a good process and good grants to try to get if you want to try to figure out things like that might help agriculture in some way. And so I'm looking into that, maybe applying for one of those and trying to start on a real small scale, figuring out how to help clean up the waste. I'd like to, ultimately, I'd love to like come up with a system. It would have to be easy for these farmers to do, and it would have to be beneficial for them. Also, not just beneficial for the water streams and the planet. So I don't know, I've got a couple different ideas about that. But go on out of here, Ross.
So I put this in the chat box. But I would love to follow up on the PFAS experimentation, because that's what we're trying to find, safer alternatives for PFAS, but eliminating them from drinking water would be, as you know, I'm a hazmat person, so I've spent many years trying to reduce upstream exposure to toxicity, but now I'm really interested in figuring out how to clean it up as well. Did that come through?
Yes, thank you. And Alonzo, I just saw your question about grants. There are grants out there for this kind of work. They are hard to get. We've applied to a lot of them. What I can say, we did recently get a grant from Metabolic Studios, who's fabulous. And I can also say that we as MycoRenewal are open to being a fiscal sponsor. If you are applying for grants, we do have a 501c3, and we can also support in the grant writing and submittal process. So if you're interested in that, you can reach out to me just through the Amazon Myco email. What else are folks thinking about doing? Anybody else want to share? Oh, thanks, Karen. So thinking about our projects, if you've got them in mind, what are you going to be your first steps? It might make sense, the same questions of like, how do we want to relate as we're networking? I'm going to bring this back so we can look at it. How do we want to interact? How do we want to network? How do we want to build our community, build our organization? What building blocks do we need? And remember, I showed the highway and then the mycelium and the difference, right? Kind of like this, like this. And do you want to okay, we got to get this grant, we need to get this project done, we want to go, or do you want to fan out a little bit and build your network first and see what's out there and observe your environment and maybe take some stuff in, process it, get some practice doing smaller projects. How do you want to do that? How do you want to go about that? Is your question, right? And then as you grow and as you expand, how you grow and how you expand is so critical. And do you want to be, none of us want to be in competition with each other. And it's just kind of this really terrible byproduct of capitalism that we end up doing that. We have to compete for grants, we have to compete for funding and media attention or whatever. So if we are going to do this great turning thing, if we are going to shift to a different way of being, how can our social movement look more like an ecosystem as we move into the South, right? How can we come together more and develop more systems for collaboration as opposed to competition? That's the big question on my mind. And then I didn't really talk about this, but here, I'll show you all the slide again. There's this part of the cycle that we call the Southwest. And the Southwest is that time where okay, whew, we just did this big thing, and now we need to just take a breath and go inside and do some self-care, right? So this is kind of the Southwest of our course, by the way. I know it's at the very end, which is kind of an odd place for it, but I think it is important to just stop, digest, sleep, take a nap. It's like the afternoon, where okay, I just ate lunch, I just need a minute. Discovery before action, beautiful. and see what you need to do to take care of yourself before you go back into your community and focus again on the community. So that rest is so important. And it goes, and this is very counter to capitalist growth, which is just exponential growth. Like you just keep going and you never stop. Or if you're working, you know, if you've ever worked a 40-hour week, you just keep going. And then you get these 2 days and you keep going, you know, it can be very intense. So if we're moving mycelially, you know, how can we take care of ourselves in the process of moving forward? And how can we take a break, you know, in that point, at that time where we're, you know, if we're that mycelium on the Petri dish, that culture that's checking out the novel toxin, you know, that time that where we like, okay, we got our information and we're coming back into ourselves and we're assessing and we're dipping into our ancestry, right? That's a very Southwesty kind of thing to do, where you just pause and look and be present, and then you figure out how you want to move forward from there. And then in the West, that's going to be the time. I think it's also important to celebrate our what we've accomplished and what we've done together, and offer gratitude. You know, we didn't do gratitude today. I usually do gratitude before any workshop that I lead. I guess I was just a little distracted. But I think I just can't stress enough how much gratitude has changed my own life, and how taking that time to just say, you know, before you eat, say, thank you for the rain and the animals and the bacteria, all the different things that made this meal possible. You know, just doing practices like that. Or when you're gathering with your group, taking a moment to really offer that gratitude. I see it as a great replacement for a fossil fuel-based industry. You know, it's like the juice that keeps us going. It's really where our power is at, I think, is with gratitude. And so how can we integrate that into our organizations and into our movements? And then, you know, as we're moving forward and moving into the Northwest, again, like what parts of our organization might need to be decomposed, and how might we need to revision before the next cycle begins? Oh, great. Emma has a response here. Cool. That's great. I'm curious if anybody has any thoughts or reflections that they want to share on this. Really?
I'll go. I feel like I'm maybe hogging the airwaves a little bit, but I'm thinking about how the food justice organization in Colorado Springs that I've been involved with for 4 years, some of y'all might have food rescues in your area, just trying to divert food waste from the landfill. This is Colorado Springs Food Rescue, and I'm hoping to like incorporate, somehow be helpful with the new food hub that they're building. They're trying to have a greenhouse, and I'm like, oh, how can we get fungi into this food system? And I have a really good friend who knows way more about mycology than I do, and so kind of following her guidance as well. But yeah, thinking about the timeline of just trying to slow down. I feel like these projects are really urgent and that my help is needed as soon as possible. But I recently applied for a job with them that I didn't get. And it turns out like the person who got it was way more fit for it. And it actually wasn't the right time for me to work for them. So now I'm like, okay, when, or how do I like tap into when it is the right time? And just paying attention, yeah, before acting, and like trying to learn some more skill sets before I write a grant and go in and say, all right, let's do this. Like I would love to see it happen like sooner rather than later, but then I think about all of the learning that comes first. And yeah, I think it's just really helpful for you to bring that up, and for me to reflect on like how long things take sometimes.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for just waiting for that right moment. Waiting for the right substrate. Yeah, Taylor.
Yeah, going along with all of that, it's something very prevalent for me in my life right now. And this project that I wanted to implement, the project actually came through in a dream, and it's a big mycofiltration installation in a place called Jenner, California, which is right on the coast where the Russian River feeds out into the Pacific Ocean. Really beautiful, ecologically sensitive, and biologically diverse place. And there's a creek that runs behind this gas station, and I've witnessed, as a kayaking guide that works on the river, I've witnessed petroleum runoff just going into this creek from all the rain. And so I wanted to implement this kind of biological buffer to hold and kind of break down that petroleum runoff before it enters the creek and ultimately goes into the estuary. And so I've been really stoked on wanting to do this project. And then all of February, we had no rain. And I was wanting to implement it in February or March, and really just having to kind of sit back in my seat and not let the urgency and the eagerness to do the work prevent me from doing the work in the right way. Because we had no rain, and since we had no rain, there wasn't any runoff going, and then the water and soil samples wouldn't have been what they could have been. So yeah, just coming back to the concept of not working from a place of like urgency, even though I know that these remediation projects feel very urgent. It's like, well, we need to do the work now because things are things are so bad. But really, taking the time to listen and observe, and especially when working with nature, there's variables that are out of our control that can have huge impacts on the implementation of a project or how a project's going. So a good reminder for both myself and everyone to just, you can have an idea and you can have the best of intentions, but waiting for that right time, waiting for the right variables to be in place so that the work that you do and the energy you put in is actually can be the best output, can give you the best output and the best results. So yeah, slowing down and taking time and working with nature as well.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you, Taylor. All right. Any last shares before we do our last thing? Awesome. So I'm used to teaching outside in nature, so this online format it's been an interesting growing edge for me. It's been an interesting helpful tip for me. And so I'm just going to encourage folks to do a certain activity that I think could be really helpful in connecting with fungi and connecting with our own innate intelligence. I will also say that just like being outside right now and being in nature, if you have access to nature, is so valuable. It's not only is it good for our immune system and our bodies in general to be breathing fresh air, but it's also pretty safe right now, I think, to be out in nature as long as you're being careful of what you touch. And so, and if you don't have to go to work, maybe you have time. So I'm gonna just share this activity here. Can y'all see that? Yeah. So the idea here is to be developing your own relationship, like I said, which generally means going out alone, but it's great if you have a buddy who's going to do the same thing. And just notice where you feel drawn. And maybe there's a mushroom, maybe there's something else that you feel drawn to. And it just looks especially bright or especially happy to see you. You get a good feeling from it. And then you can just sit with it or stand with it and see what comes to you. So clearing your mind. If you have a mindfulness practice, that's great. Where you just focus on your breath and focus on being present. And you can see just what comes, like what kind of thought processes come, what kind of things come up in your mind. Maybe you're just thinking about the movie that you saw last night, or maybe you start getting an image of, something that you've been looking for, something that feels really good to you, or maybe you get an idea. The idea is to just sit and be present for at least 10 minutes and see what happens. And then it's really easy to forget that stuff also. So I recommend taking a journal with you and writing stuff down. And I'm, I teach mushroom hunting, and I always encourage reciprocity, or a way to give back to whatever we're taking. And I also like to encourage consent when working with plants and fungi. And so I always just kind of ask, and it seems really silly if you're not used to doing it. I ask, like, hey, can I take a little piece of you? And I use, my own understanding of like, what is, so it's a mix of intuition and science. Like everything is a mix of intuition and science pretty much. But, and I, I'm like, okay, so I noticed that there's a lot of this tree. This is a really common tree in this area. I think it's okay if I take one leaf, right? And then I mix that with my own intuition. And like, does it feel right? Does it feel good to take this leaf? Or does it feel kind of just not right inside? And so just tuning into that before you take anything is something I want to support. And then if you do take something back, it's something that you can hold on to and can remind you of that connection. And you can, even when you're back at home, if you have like a special place where you like to put nature objects or anything like that, you can keep it there and maintain that connection to that special being that you got to hang out with. Cool. Any questions on that? Great. So that is your final homework piece. Congratulations to folks who did do some or most of the homework. Way to go. Nicely done. I would like to begin our closing. And since we forgot to do gratitude at the beginning, I'd love to do it now. And I want to ask folks, we'll do a go around. I'll just call on people's names in kind of the order that they're on my screen, for lack of a better system for doing this. And if you want to share something that you're grateful for, we would so love to hear from you. Can we start with Anne Blake?
Joys of being first in the alphabet.
No.
I am in this moment very grateful for this community, and more broadly for the international community that I get to work with. I grew up overseas, I live in California, and being connected to an international community is what helps me thrive, and for that I'm profoundly grateful.
Thank you. David Peters. You're on mute still.
There. Hello. I'm super grateful for my teachers, and you're now in that that community of people who I've learned so much from and pay special attention to. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Kane.
I'm grateful for the fungi, for the patience that they teach me, for being able to sit and watch mycelium spread across agar and then through blocks of wood chips, and just sit and just observe and watch. And I'm grateful for all the knowledge that's being shared. It's really lovely. Thank you. It's been great.
Karen Mills.
I'm grateful that the weather has broken and morels are coming up soon. People are finding them. But I'm also great in that same vein. I'm grateful for the place that I live and the being able to be, I guess, so connected with nature and to have this rich abundance all around me. Especially when things start to get scary.
Awesome, thank you. Anna.
I'm really grateful for my mom because I'm staying with her right now, and it's like provided me with this sense of like safety and security that I didn't have growing up because things were different. And everything is really scary, and sometimes I focus on that more than I want to, but then I can just come back and like actually feel grounded and safe, and like I have shelter. And yeah, I feel like with the virus going around, people who don't have shelter, including some people I know, are like just really at risk. And so feeling like I can be safe here in this space has been a really huge resource in just my recovery and being part of this course. Like I wouldn't be able to tap in if I didn't have a solid place to stay. So yeah, really grateful for this opportunity as well. It's kind of definitely helped me stay optimistic with everything that's going on.
Thank you. Kristen.
Yeah, I'm definitely grateful for all the metaphors that fungi have to offer, especially the circularness of different processes and how I could live those more. And I'm grateful for the sun coming back. I feel like it's been a lot sunnier the past few days as spring progresses.
Ariel? Is it Ariel or Ariel?
Ariel.
Ariel.
Thanks for asking. I'm really grateful to be connected with you guys because I've wanted to learn more about fungi for a long time and felt overwhelmed, and I love being part of the community of knowledge sharing, and I feel like just by being in contact with you guys and what you've developed over your life, I can utilize and grow, and you guys, I don't know, just knowing I have that support system makes it feel possible for me to do some of this work.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. Thanks. Ellen.
I'm feeling grateful for the example that you're all setting of loving nature so much, because lately I've realized how much of my life I've spent indoors and I need to get out there more. So I just thank you for your examples.
Taylor.
I feel so incredibly grateful to have had the opportunity to be part of this course in all the ways I've been invited to receive and to give, and just to have that reciprocity with all of you, and just such deep reverence for the fungi, and to be an ever evolving and ever learning student of the fungi and a conduit for them, and into the lifelong journey of returning back home.
Emma.
I'm feeling really grateful for community, this online community, and also I guess a lot of online communities right now, especially with COVID-19, like just seeing the care that folks have for each other has been really, I guess, heartwarming, even though it's like a very, very difficult time. It's like kind of the ways that community is like showing up or choosing not to show up physically, but show up for each other. It's been really great.
Alonzo, are you wrote your answer in the chat box, and I'm assuming that you're not able to speak right now.
Can you hear me though?
Oh yeah, we can.
Yeah, my camera is not working now, but I'm grateful for all of the organizers who took time to set this up for lifelong learners such as myself, and who, just gave me the chance to be immersed in this community of very amazing minds and spirits who are very connected to the fungi queendom. And it's also something that I have been curious about and just wondering out loud. And through the last few weeks, I've met some amazing people digitally, and hoping that in the future I can be of service to a lot of the bioremediation work that's presently happening. Privileged to be able-bodied and to have freedom of movement in some senses, and yeah, I just hope that through this course, we can continue to put action to all the dreams and wishes that everyone here has expressed. And so thankful for all of that, and just thankful for the simplicity of being able to experience so much knowledge, in the safety of a home. And thanks to all of you for being here.
Well, I'm grateful for each and every one of you for showing up in your myriad of ways, and for really taking this course into your lives and into your work, and for listening to us, and so respectfully and so thoughtfully, and also for everything that you've shared and everything that each one of you has brought to this course. I'm so grateful to be in community with all of you. I also want to give a deep gratitude to the water. That's what's coming up right now for me, which we're just starting. We had this long dry period here, and now we're just starting to get the rain again. And just the way that it moves through us and helps us, cleanses us, nourishes us, and restores us. And for all the fungi that help redistribute that water where it's most needed. Wow, thank you all so much. This is the end. I will say that we are thinking about having an advanced course in the summer in August. And I was like, I really want to have an in-person component to it, but we'll have to just see what happens here with the coronavirus. So I think we'll do probably some online course that would be like the next level up from this, and go a bit deeper into some of these topics. I think we will probably talk a bit more about post-fire fungi and really make that a bit more of the focus. And I also want to share that we would so love any feedback that you have, positive, negative, anything you've got. I'm going to send out a survey via email, and while it's fresh in your mind, it really helps us. And this is our first time doing an online course, and so I hope it went well, but I don't really know because I haven't heard from you all very much about it, which is fine. I have gotten some feedback, and it would so help us out if you guys could fill out the survey that I'm going to share with you. And I really hope that we can all stay in touch. I look forward to seeing some of you next week for a post-course integration piece. And yeah, thank you all so much. Yeah, wishing you all the best on your fungal journey. May the spores be with you.
Thank you, Maya. This has been a lovely course.
It really has.
Much appreciated.
Yes. And I just wanted to say too, anyone that wants to stay in contact with me after the course, I'll type my email in the chat box. Please ask questions, and I would love to talk about mycofiltration, like grassroots experiments with you guys, and just like fuel the fire of your excitement and your stokedness to pursue these things. So yeah, and I'm also moving to Washington in April. So if you guys know any cool people up there in the Pacific Northwest, send them my way and further the mycelial networks.
Thank you, Taylor. Yeah, and I'd love to stay in touch. That would be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Right, man. Make it weird.
Thanks, everyone.